it's right there in front of me all the time, and that if I veer away from it a little bit, it just takes a slight change of focus to get back.
Esther's friend said to her the other day, you know, we are only a baby or a puppy away from alignment.
True.
Because it takes very little to get right back there.
And I used to think that it was a giant effort. Like when I was in the vortex, it just felt so, it was like ecstasy. And then when I was out, I was so miserable. And I would be out for longer and longer because I was focusing on how miserable I was for not being in the vortex. And finally, I have learned that it's literally that shift of focus.
The good news is that when you go to sleep at night, your momentum stops. So even if you have been encouraging a path that is taking you from who you really are and what you really want, when you slumber, that momentum subsides, it stops. So when you awaken, you have a very good opportunity to make the choices that keep you in better and better alignment. And knowing that and deliberately reaching for better feeling thoughts is very productive.
And thank you for teaching us that as well, because that made a huge difference in my life. Because I used to wake up and I was just right where I left it, miserable, worrying about work or whatever. And now I get up, and even if I start to go that way, I just stop, and I don't even have to think about it.
But there's a piece, you see, we've been talking about all of these pieces, and you've been very good at picking these pieces up and incorporating them into what you know. But let's talk about this last piece or two and how it fits in. So let's say you are like most people. You are living a sort of conditional life, and almost everyone offers almost all of their vibration, which law of attraction is responding to all the time, in response to what they are observing. So if you're observing something that feels good, then you're getting more of it. If you're observing something that doesn't feel so good, you're getting more of it. And most are sort of a mixed bag, so you're getting some of all of it. So let's say that for whatever reason, you have been and are living a sort of conditional experience where you're focused upon conditions and responding to them. So let's say that you are, for example, an employer who is focused upon an employee who is not pleasing you. So clearly, because of the way you feel, you're not focused upon what you want. You're focused upon what you've got, but you're not focusing upon what you want. And you can tell by the way you feel that you're not in alignment with who you really are and what you really want. You could find the vibrational essence of an improved employee, but you're not. Instead, you're focusing upon what you've got. So now you go down that path further and further. Your deviation from what you want and what you've got gets stronger and stronger. You could have turned it around earlier and easier. You didn't have to go so far, but finally it goes far enough that you fire that employee. Well, it's an action that in some cases we think is a good one. In other words, it could be easier for you. In fact, we would say it would be easier for you to find your path of greatest alignment relative to that position that you want to feel, now that that person who isn't doing a good job isn't there. In other words, now they're not there to observe. It's more likely that you could think about what you want and find vibrational alignment with it and then attract it. But most don't, because they fire the person and then they think about why they fired the person. They hold themselves in the vibrational pattern, even though the person is no longer there. They hold themselves in the vibrational frequency of the unwanted. So whether it's this example or a relationship or anything, the tendency is to be so conditioned to focus on conditions that even when you sometimes make a very good decision, which is to put yourself in a better position where that condition isn't beating up on you anymore and isn't controlling the vibrational frequency, still in your guilt about not pleasing them, in your guilt about doing what you think is best for you, you hold yourself in those patterns where things can't improve. So the next one's pretty much like the last one. Different faces, different places, but same experience keeps happening to you. Is this making sense to you? So what would be a better plan? Well, a better plan would be, before it gets so uncomfortable, to make a new decision about what you want. Because if you could make a better decision, a clear decision, A clearer decision. Say it again. A clearer decision. Say it more specifically. A clearer, less resisted statements. In other words, clearer meaning purer, meaning fewer contradictions about it, throwing less contradiction on the path. So if you could make, even when you still have this employee who is not pleasing you, if you could stay focused upon what you want, that employee would either come with you or go away, but you wouldn't reach that place, that great crescendo of discomfort. You see what we're getting at? So when you decide that you're going to play it out vibrationally and emotionally rather than in terms of conditions, what begins to happen is the conditions begin to take care of themselves. You begin creating from what we are calling the inside out. You begin holding your own vibrational patterns in alignment with who you really are, and then everything else just becomes a cooperative component to the vibrational essence that you have established. So we want to say to you, to make it even clearer, you are human beings, not human doings, which means you are offerers of vibration. And yes, of course, you are also actors. You are also those who offer action. But if you let yourself believe that the action trumps everything, so you're just acting and reacting, then you're not taking care of the vibration, and then the reactions are just following the path of greater and greater resistance. We think you heard most of that. It was a pretty good unfolding. So now where are you?
Apparently you're reading my mind. Because I have that exact situation at work and trying to figure out what to do with an employee. So you answered the question I didn't even ask yet, but thank you.
Well, the thing is, we want to put this statement in the mix, and then we'll clarify it because it sounds like a flawed statement. You can't get there from there. Now, to clarify, what we want to say is, you can't get to where you want to be with action. You've got to get to where you want to be with vibration. But sometimes taking an action gives you a reprieve from things that were keeping you vibrationally out of whack. And that's what so many of you are not willing to give yourself a break without feeling guilty. And so when you remove something unwanted from your experience, you usually don't remove the unwanted vibration because you stand in a justifying mode or a defensive mode, where if you could just take the action and make a statement to yourself, I'm doing the best that I can do, and this was a good choice for me, and then let it rest a little bit. Don't keep it active by talking about it. What will happen is your true vibration will take hold. It's like, those of you who have been hearing us for a while, it's our longest and favorite analogy. Vision a cork bobbing on the surface of the water, and let's call it alignment. You can hold it under the water, let's call that resistance. When you let go of it, it will bob right back to the surface. That's the thing that we want you to understand, that if it were not for the conditions that you are so intertwined with and sometimes unhappy with, if you could focus in a more caring way about the way you feel, you could disentangle from those conditions, your cork would float, and now you're in the driver's seat. Now you're in a place where what you want is flowing to you consistently. So let's go back and revisit that strong statement that we made. You can't get there from here. You can't get there from where you are. What do we mean? Don't try it conditionally. Do it vibrationally. But wait, Abraham, you just suggested that maybe it might be a good idea for me to give myself permission to remove myself from the unwanted condition. Yes, we did. We think you should remove yourself from every unwanted condition if you can. But once you removed yourself from the unwanted condition, you've got to take the more important step, which was always the more important step, which is remove yourself from the vibrational patterning. And you'll reach the place that you can take the vibrational patterning without the action. You will. But in the meanwhile, do whatever it takes to feel better about where you are. How's that?
Beautiful.
Path of least resistance. So you want to talk about something, and let's see if we can find what the path of least resistance is. Want to talk about something real? You want to talk about something, some experience, and let's walk through it and find the nuggets of lesser and less resistance?
Certainly, we could use the example of the employee.
All right, so start talking.
So I have an employee that simply doesn't work. She can't do her tasks. She is unable to perform what she was hired to do.
All right, so here's the question that we have for you. And this is the only question that will ever matter. Do you think that we're not talking about anybody else, we're not talking about what's right or wrong or what's most voted on, we're just asking you, do you think that since the only thing that matters is your relationship with your inner being? You see, we're not talking about getting a better employee. We're not talking about even improving that condition. We're talking about your alignment. Do you think you have a better probability of being in alignment if that person was not bumping into you all day, every day, or if that person is bumping into you all day, every day? What's the path of least resistance?
Not bumping into is
all right.
easier.
Do you think you would feel better if you weren't bumping up against all of those inadequacies? Or do you think you would feel better bumping up against all of those inadequacies? Stay with us.
Not bumping up.
So, do you think that overnight this person is going to become adequate in all of those ways?
No.
So, if you feel that you would feel better not bumping up, we're not talking about getting the job done. We're just talking about how you personally feel, because how you personally feel is everything, because how you personally feel has everything to do with the way you translate vibration. And in your vortex is the perfect employee that you can't find because you're bumping up against somebody that's keeping you mad all the time. You see what we're getting at? So what's the path of least resistance? To bump up against something that doesn't feel good? Well, the path of least resistance would be to be such a powerful creator that you're not bumping up against it. But are you there? You're not there. You're bumping up against it. So what's your path of least resistance? How are you going to keep from bumping up against it? Can you give yourself permission to meet your needs or your desires first? So let's say you decide, that's the path of least resistance. The path of least resistance is for that person to not be there. Now what happens? What happens if that person were not there? So let's say that you've made that move and now that person is not there. Now what happens? What happens to the work? Was any work getting done?
A little. Yeah.
So what happens now that little bit of work that was getting done isn't getting done, but all of those mistakes that were being made aren't being made? Right. Does it still remain the path of least resistance for you?
Somebody has to replace her.
You're getting too far down the road. We're just asking you, do you feel better now that that condition has changed? Do you feel better? Because you might feel worse. In other words, you might say, no, now nobody's answering the phone. But that's what we mean when we say only you can answer that. You've got to take the path of least resistance for you. You can't do what Dr. Phil says that you should do. You can't do what the debate on the talk show says is the right thing to do. You can't even get twirled up in what it means to that person who had a job who now doesn't have a job, because that just adds clutter to your path. We're just asking you, is it really so complicated that you can't say, I feel better with this than that? It's so interesting because it's so hard for most people to give themselves permission to feel better, because it feels like you should be serving the other. Often it feels like you should be serving the other. So let's say that you make that decision and that person is no longer there and you're no longer bumping up against that. Now you have some other choices, because you can remember bumping up against that and justify your actions by remembering that. But now you're still bumping up against it. So the action you took is not serving you at all because you're still bumping up against it. So now the next question is, are you less likely to bump up against it now that it's not there in your experience than you were? Or are you going to justify your behavior by explaining to everybody why you took the action? What's the path of least resistance for you? And by that we mean, which path are you most likely to take right now? Path of least resistance. Which path are you most likely to take right now? You going to feel better, or are you going to beat up on yourself for your action?
Beat up. Beat up on myself.
Because that's the path of least resistance, because that's the pattern. All right. So now you're beating up on yourself. Right. Now you're beating up on yourself, and now you're in a position where what? What's the universe yielding to you now? Under those conditions, is the universe going to bring you somebody bright and shiny who knows what they're doing?
Yeah.
No, they're going to bring you somebody just like that person.
'Cause this
Different
is-
face. Well,
It's the second employee, the same thing.
different face, different experiences. So now here you are trying to take the path of least resistance. But this person is even worse than the last person was. This person is not even trying. This person is really, really not helping you out at all. So what's the path of least resistance, really? What is the path of least resistance? To hold on until they become a different person? What's the path of least resistance? Fire them! Fire them! That's by far the path of least resistance. By far the path of least resistance. It's by far the path of least resistance. Because you attracted somebody far worse than the one that you had before. And you've already seen what they're doing and you're all twirled up in it. In other words, so the path of least resistance is for you to let them go from your experience. But now, what's your next path of least resistance? Are you going to beat up on yourself? You've already found out what that does. Has your path of least resistance changed for you at all? Did you find relief in the letting go of this person? Did you find any relief?
Yes.
And now, can you find relief in the expectation of someone to replace that person? And are you more or less likely? In other words, do you think you're going to, this time, be as likely to keep defending and justifying? Or did you already have an experience that showed you what that yields, and so has a different path of lesser resistance showed itself to you?
Absolutely.
And what does that path look like? How might that play out to you?
Concentrating on the positive aspects of it.
But that might be too big of a jump. And from where you are, can you concentrate on the positive aspects, or can you just feel the relief of not bumping up against that? So are you going to beat up on yourself for your misattracting, for your attracting what you don't want? Or are you going to appreciate yourself for your guidance system?
Appreciate.
That's the path of least resistance, isn't it? Are you going to be mad at yourself for the slowdown in work that's getting done? Or are you going to appreciate the fresh start that you're giving yourself?
Appreciate.
Path of least resistance. Are you mad at yourself for where you stand? Or are you understanding that you can get to wherever you want to be from wherever you are? Do you feel more futile or less futile? Does it feel clearer or more convoluted? How do you feel in this scenario that we're unfolding?
Clear.
Feel clear?
Yes.
So you do feel clear because you've given yourself permission to do whatever it took to feel clear. You gave yourself permission to take action. You gave yourself permission to find a better feeling thought. There's no formula that's right or wrong, but you're the only one who can make it from where you are. So here you are, you're standing here. You still need someone to fill that slot. You feel better that at least the mistakes aren't being made. So here you're standing in this place of lesser resistance than you've had for a while. So these vibrations that have all of the answers, the vortex that's full of everything you want, are you more likely or less likely to pick up on some of that?
More likely.
More likely. And as those thoughts come, what's the emotional manifestation that comes? That feeling of clarity, that feeling of stability, that feeling of adventure, that feeling of well-being, that feeling of optimism, that feeling of eagerness. You're starting to feel lighter. Your business doesn't feel lost. You don't feel lost. Nothing feels as heavy as it did. Everything feels lighter. In fact, right now you're sort of wondering why you made such a big hairy deal about all of that, but then the big hairy deal went away, so it's easy not to worry about the big hairy deal when the big hairy deal is not there. But the bottom line is you feel better now, yes?
Absolutely.
So now, are you more likely or less likely to receive a thought or an impulse?
More likely.
And when that impulse comes, is it more likely or less likely to lead to something that is pleasing?
Way more likely.
And isn't it logical, knowing the formula or the pattern of the vibration turning from the vibration to the creation? Isn't it more likely now that you really are on that path? Won't you feel enlivened? Aren't you clear about the interview that you will offer? Don't you know more now what you're looking for? Won't you know it more when people sit before you and you're interviewing? Aren't you more likely to have a pure vibration that is bringing from them what you want rather than a scattered vibration that's bringing some of all of it? Isn't it more likely that the universe will bring to you potential people that you might hire that are more in harmony with who you are when there's clarity in your vibration instead of a jumble?
Absolutely.
And doesn't it now make perfect sense that before you did that, that you couldn't get there from there? You see what we're getting at?
Yes.
And wasn't it fun all along the way? Don't you like figuring things out? Don't you like knowing what you want? Aren't you appreciative of the clarity that was given to you? Didn't people who aren't doing a good job help you to identify even what a good job is?
Definitely. Yeah.
Isn't it fun to gather together with talented people who are, for whatever reason, in alignment with who they are, who then have the best probability of the most being evoked from them? Is it logical that if you're not in alignment with who you are, that you could hire someone else who is in alignment with who they are? Isn't it logical that they would reflect to you how you're feeling?
Definitely.
And that they would play back to you how you're feeling? Isn't it nice that they helped you sort out how you want to feel? And wasn't it nice that you took the path of least resistance, that nobody else gets to decide whether it's right or wrong? You got to decide. And don't you feel better now that you feel clear? And now that you feel clear, isn't it logical that it's going to unfold in a way that is pleasing you? See how it works? You got to give yourself permission to do what feels best for you. But first you've got to decide what doesn't feel good and what does feel good. And you've just got to keep asking that question and following that path. And before you know it, you'll be in a place where you'll be so clear that you'll be evoking from others that clarity, or they will not come into your experience. There will be a mismatch. And if that which isn't clarity is coming into your experience, it's because you're not offering clarity. And if you're not offering clarity, the majority of the reason that you're not offering clarity is because you're observing what you've got and adding a mess to the mix. So we sorted it all out. We just explained to you every relationship that you'll ever have and why they feel the way they do. And in all of this, what you want to do is go home to everyone and go to work with everyone and announce to everyone, hey, I have an announcement for you. I'm responsible for the way you behave in my experience. I'm responsible for the way you behave in my experience. And some of you need to go away so that I can clean up the way I think about you. Because we got this cycle going. You're here, you're behaving like that, I'm observing it, I'm attracting more. In other words, sometimes you need a break from the condition. What about unconditional experience? Maybe you need to separate yourselves from some of the conditions in order to gain some clarity about who you are. Maybe you need to make your relationship with who you are and how you feel your number one priority, you see. And when you do, then lots of those relationships will come back into your experience, but the best of them will rendezvous with the best of you, you see. And that's really what this world is all about. You never said when you decided to come, well, I'll come, but clean it all up before I get there. And get them all on my page before I get there. You said they are all wonderfully, selfishly oriented. And so am I. And if each of us is selfish enough to find the best feeling thoughts that we can find so that we're in harmony with our true selves and our true power, then as law of attraction responds to the clarity that is us, it's going to be a really delicious unfolding, you see. And then you're the uplifter that you were born to be. Then when you are with others, no matter what they're doing, you're always evoking the best from them because you've trained yourself into the best of you. But they are irrelevant to the best of you. They don't need to be the best of them in order for you to find the best of you. But when you find the best of you, you find the best of them. That's oriented the way you intended it. You see how it works? And that's service. That's the service that you're all wanting to provide. But you're getting it in the right priority so that you can offer it. Helpful?
Very, thank you.
Yeah.